Hey everyone. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Jake. I'm a field organizer for Abundant Housing LA and policy analyst. Thank you so much for everyone for being here so we can talk about the CHIP, the Citywide Housing Implementation Program, Incentive Program. And I'm going to hand it off to my colleague Scott in a couple seconds here. Scott, take it away.
Okay, everyone. Good to see everyone. Thank you for sharing your screen, Jake. Maybe I'll just say forward when we want to advance the slide. Um, and hold on just 1 second. I'm sorry, guys.
No worries. Yeah. So the we're the as I'm sure you all know, the city has a virtual hearing on the CHIP coming up this Thursday. We've been doing a lot of public comment around the CHIP. We had a community meeting. We've done action alerts. Scott and others have been meeting with individual council offices. But the meeting this Thursday is going to be our first opportunity to really show up in a big way and let LA City Planning staff know how we feel about this ambitious, this important opportunity to allow for a ton of new homes and to reverse our segregation patterns to make it so that Angelinos can afford an affordable house in the neighborhood of their choosing, so that people can live closer to jobs and good schools, things like that. Scott, you ready?
I am ready. Appreciate your patience. We
No
have so
worries.
many moving parts this week. We've got an action alert about to go out, which Omar had to get my eyes on, and we have this prep session, and we're working on a coalition letter, and so there's a lot of moving parts. It's very exciting. We're going to go into some detail tonight and get a little bit wonky, but before I go into any of these slides, I just want to give you like the very, very high level takeaways for tonight. And thank you so much for being here. The city created a housing element, which they need to do by state law. The main way they're implementing it is through this Citywide Housing Incentive Program. This is Abundant Housing LA's top priority locally for the entire year. It's a very, very big deal. It is going to determine whether we build housing across the city or not. So far, it is not meeting our standards. So we're going to educate ourselves today, but the most important thing is please submit that action alert when you get it in your email very soon. And please show up for public comments on Thursday. There's going to be a staff level hearing. That means no decision will be made on Thursday, but city planning will be listening to the people. And they need to hear from as many pro-housing voices as possible. We saw last fall what we are able to do as a movement when we showed up in force for the ED1 staff level hearing to codify, to make the very successful ED1 program permanent. And that shifted the trajectory of that ordinance. It's hit some bumps along the way since then, but we made a huge difference. So I hope you will put that in your schedule for Thursday evening. Let's get into kind of the meat of this.
48%.
Sorry, was that a question? Okay. We have the CHIP. It is, so we're going to talk a little bit about what the CHIP is. We'll talk about what we think is positive about this ordinance, what we're concerned about, how this ordinance has changed, because we had a version 1 that we have responded to via a coalition letter, in late May, and now we have a second version, which in most ways has been a step back. And then we'll go over some like key talking points for Thursday. So what is the CHIP? This stands for Citywide Housing Incentive Program. This is the main way in which the city is implementing its housing elements.
Yeah, a really short
Can
shirt.
we maybe let me see if I can mute Kevin.
Oh, that's cool.
Okay.
The old Tulip United Mileage Plus shirt. Yeah, this thing's fucking cool.
Okay. I think everyone's muted now. Okay. So, this is, it's not the only way in which the city is implementing its housing element, but it is the most important one. It is the most important of the programs that would implement the rezoning program, which is what will get us more ability to build more housing. Can we move forward, Jake? So how does this work? So a lot of cities, they just rezone, rezone the city to make up the gap for what they are obligated to produce over the 8-year RENA period, and what their zoning actually could reasonably be expected to produce. LA is doing things in a little bit of a different way. Instead of doing a base rezoning, like changing it from R1, which is single family, to R2, which is duplex or higher, they are using an incentive approach. So you might have heard of the Transit-Oriented Communities Program, which has been one of our main incentive programs locally, or the State Density Bonus Program. Same idea. You get incentives, which could include extra height or floor to air ratio or units, in exchange for providing a certain proportion of your overall units as deed restricted affordable housing. So let's move forward. So how much housing does LA need to build? So a lot is the short answer. So our RENA number, our housing target for the 8-year RENA period was around 450,000 units. Now, cities are obligated to study what their current zoning would be reasonably expected to produce. And what they found was that zoning as is could potentially produce maybe half of that, actually less than half of that. So we're in the red for about 250,000 housing units. And that includes both market rate units and below market rate units. And so we were obligated to create a rezoning program to bridge that gap. And the CHIP is the main tool of that rezoning program. Let's move. So we've got, here you see there's some other pieces that are part of the rezoning program. There's an adaptive reuse ordinance. There's an ordinance that helps strengthen renter protections. But the main juice here is the Citywide Housing Incentive Program, and it has a number of different incentive programs as part of it, including changes to how we implement the state's incentive program, the State Density Bonus Program, a series of incentives around transit and high opportunity neighborhoods for building mixed income housing, and also an incentive program specifically dedicated to producing 100% affordable housing. Here you see it broken down just a bit more. The mixed income incentive program includes transit-oriented areas. So this will end up being the codification of the Transit-Oriented Communities Program, which many of us know well. They are calling it now the Transit-Oriented Incentive Areas. What's one of the things that's really new is this idea of opportunity corridors to make sure that we build in affluent communities. So opportunity corridors are key major corridors in those in highest and high opportunity areas in the city, and increases incentives to build housing directly on those corridors. And then we have a transition program, which is essentially a missing middle housing program to build that kind of smaller multifamily housing within a certain radius of those opportunity corridors. And then we have the AHIP, or Affordable Housing Incentive Program, which has a few different pieces, including a faith-based piece that goes a little bit further than the state law SB4 that passed last year, and some other provisions. So what does it do? So we already talked about the notion of bonuses, incentives. So that's kind of the key strategy. There's also another big thing happening here, which is this city planning is recognizing the value of streamlining housing production, making the process simpler. We've seen that how impactful that is with ED1, where we had an explosion of applications for 100% affordable housing, many of which, a majority of which, were from private developers that were not previously in the business of producing deed restricted housing. So this is a very big deal. We want to cut the costs of these projects. So one of the things that they're trying to do is make more projects go through a by right pathway rather than a discretionary pathway that can get you into all kinds of headaches, like environmental review, lawsuits, cranky council members, and more. So that's kind of the broad outlines of the program. And I will say that the broad outlines are good. You know, the idea of focusing new housing near transit and in affluent communities that have been exclusionary is very smart. Those are the places that are most important to build new housing in the city. The idea of streamlining and delivering those projects more quickly and more cheaply is very, very welcome. The problem is in the details, and we'll get into that now. So here's just like we got some nice slides with some maps, so you can kind of like picture what this looks like. So TOC, the codification of TOC would have like the same geography as the current TOC program, which basically has a number of different tiers up to a half a mile from transit, with a greater number of incentives near rail stations and lesser incentives farther away and near less frequent transit. So this program would make that permanent, because that program was actually passed by the voters as part of Measure JJJ and will sunset. It has been quite successful. Next slide. And now this is the opportunity corridors. So here we're looking at just parts of the city, the richest parts of the city. So places like the West Side, the southern and western parts of the San Fernando Valley, Eagle Rock, Los Feliz, Fairfax District, affluent communities that have not delivered the amount of housing that we need, and are often for the most part jobs rich and services rich. This has some overlap with the transit corridors, but not complete overlap. So think about a place like Ventura Boulevard in the San Fernando Valley, which is the San Fernando Valley's main street, its most vibrant street, doesn't actually have particularly good transit, but it has fantastic services, many jobs. And so this is a really important place to put to put housing. So so this is a great addition to our toolkit to be able to build on these opportunity corridors bigger than we have in the past. Next slide. And this is the Opportunity Transition Area Program. So the idea here is adjacent within a certain radius away from that major corridor in those opportunity neighborhoods, you would be able to build at a small scale the kind of missing middle housing typologies that LA was really built on in the 1920s through 1950s. Think fourplexes and duplexes and bungalow courts and courtyard apartments, all those wonderful typologies that are very hard to build now, and have been, are very successful in delivering kind of naturally affordable housing. And then there's the AHIP. So this is the Affordable Housing Incentive Program. You can kind of think of this as quite similar to ED1, right? This may end up being the successor to ED1. We don't know whether ED1 will pass, but this does something very similar, which is it streamlines 100% affordable housing. And this program has the broadest geography of
They need to
any.
keep the shrimp option on.
This program has the broadest geography of any of the programs proposed, with the notion that we need deed restricted housing so badly, we need to put it all across the city. So you can see on the map how much more widespread the geography for this program is. But it does not include single family homes. And we will get to that soon. So what are we concerned about? So first of all, the city is obligated by state law to produce housing, to produce a lot of housing, right? To plan for a lot of housing, but it's also obligated to address our history of segregation in land use in our city. That is a state obligation. We call it affirmatively furthering fair housing. And we know that single-family zoning is the descendant of redlining. You overlay a redlining map from the 1930s with a map of where single-family zoning is and where multifamily zoning is in the city of LA, there is a very high correlation. So whether intentional or not, and I would argue in many cases it has been intentional, that has been the effect. So we do not think that it is possible for this program to truly affirmatively further fair housing if you don't touch 72% of land in the city, single family areas, many of which are jobs and transit and service adjacent. We also don't think it furthers fair housing to completely remove the coastal zone, some of our most exclusionary communities, from the incentive programs, or to make it much harder to build in historic areas, even on non-contributing property. So that's a big concern of us. Of course, we're concerned about housing production. We know that our homeless crisis, our housing cost crisis is a crisis of supply. We need a lot more housing at all income levels. And taking single family off the table takes a lot of land, a lot of potential off the table. We also are concerned that as the incentives as currently structured will not deliver, because many projects will not be feasible. And then finally, we are concerned that maintaining these existing patterns of where multifamily housing is allowed and where it is not will continue to fuel displacement, right? Because the displacement pressure will be on the existing rent-stabilized multifamily housing stock, and people will be evicted. and some of those folks will end up unhoused. So this we have to recognize the linkage between these zoning practices and the risk that the displacement risk, and we think that exclusionary zoning is one of the greatest drivers of displacement in the city. Of course, single family homes are mostly homeowner occupied, and all of those homeowner occupied units are displacement free. Those folks can decide under a different regime to sell their home of their own choice, make a good amount of money, do whatever they want with it, and nobody is being hurt. Next slide. So what are we asking for? One, we want to allow single-family zone properties to participate in all of the incentive programs. That's going to unlock a lot of land to help build the housing that we need and open access to more exclusionary communities. We want to make the Opportunity Transition Area program actually work. First of all, I don't think you can make it work if you don't have single family homes on the table, because who is going to knock down a fourplex to build a sixplex or an eightplex? That has a huge cost from a human perspective and from a financial perspective, because you have to relocate those human beings. And of course, that land is also more expensive because it's currently improved with more units than a single family parcel. So you're really hobbling the program by taking that off the table. In addition, they've done a bunch of other things to make the program almost useless, including making the geographic radius from the opportunity corridors far too narrow, and including quite restrictive standards. We want to remove the exemption for the coastal zone for all the mixed income incentive programs. That is a huge problem. That's something new that was added to the ordinance that makes it even less equitable, which is disappointing. We want to restore unlimited density in the highest tiers of the transit-oriented incentive area program. And let's see, am I missing something on the bottom there? So next slide. So I hinted at this a little bit before, but we're going to talk about the changes to the chip. So we had version 1, and now we're at version 2. So the best piece of news is that the city actually heard us on the Opportunity Corridor Transition Area program. We don't think it's there yet, but they have improved it. They widened the radius for the program, so more parcels would be in play. And they increased the unit count for the projects that would be the closest to the opportunity corridors. So that has been moving in the right direction. They've also added some incentives that will help create larger family size units, which is a big issue in housing production in Los Angeles. But these few pieces of good news were really overshadowed by a lot of stuff that was concerning. Next slide, please. So number one, so one of the things that was originally in the ordinance, which was fantastic, was for the transit-oriented, the projects closest to transit using the transit-oriented incentive area program. The original draft of the ordinance granted them unlimited density. So that means there's no cap on the number of units in the project. Now, there were other parameters like height and floor-to-air ratio that did limit the scale of those projects. But that is a very effective tool for allowing some more dense projects. They took that away. It's not clear why. we believe it will drive more displacement because you'll have to use more parcels to get to the same density. There were also some really horrible exclusionary things, like limiting FAR incentives, Florida air ratio incentives in historic areas, even on non-contributing properties. These are properties that are not historic, but just happen to be in an area that has been labeled historic. So now we're saying those projects have to be smaller and serve fewer people and create fewer homes that we so desperately need. It's a dumb exclusionary idea. Same with the coastal zone. So the coastal zone is, not everyone on the call might know this, but the California coast has like an extra governance layer. There's a coastal commission that has to oversee coastal areas as defined in state law. This was a thing that had a very good intention to it, right? We want to protect our coast from environmental damage, but like CEQA, it has been weaponized. And the Coastal Commission has traditionally been terrible on housing. So this kind of bakes that in at the local level, which is a real problem. A lot of the coastal zone areas are urbanized land. And people are desperate to be able to live in these communities near all the jobs on the west side. So that was a very bad change. And overall, there's just been reduction in the FAR. We're getting decent incentives around density, but if you limit it through other things like FAR or heights, then the number of units you're getting is meaningless because you can't fit the units in that massing. And so the folks that have looked at this in detail, the experts have said this is not working out. And in fact, overall, this second version of the ordinance would be a step backward from our current TOC program. Next slide, please. So here's our major talking points. And we, when you RSVP through our event page for Thursday, we'll have a Google Doc talking points page for you as well. And it's kind of a choose your own adventure. So there'll be lots of options if you want to talk about housing equity or housing production or feasibility of construction. You can do whatever, use whatever resonates with you. But tonight I'm just going to share, 4 of what we think are the most important talking points. So number 1, ending the apartment ban in exclusionary areas. So the exclusion of single-family zones from the CHIP is wrong. It's bad for affordability, and it's bad for equity. We've talked about this a bunch tonight, but that is really if you had to distill it to to the thing that we're talking about the most, to our key priority with the CHIP, it's this, and that's what we've built a broad coalition of progressive organizations around. We have a coalition letter that we delivered in May with 45 signatures from pro-housing groups, nonprofit housing developers, climate and mobility organizations, social justice organizations, faith-based organizations, a very impressive, unprecedented coalition. And this basic fairness issue is really what we're building that coalition around. And it has broad ramifications for housing production and equity. Let's move on to the next slide. 2, legalize missing middle housing. As I was saying earlier, we love the idea of missing middle housing. I think many of us want to live in these housing typologies, right? We want a front door. We want some open space. We want to be able to connect with our neighbors. Not that there's anything wrong with a 5/2 large mixed-use building either. But we need as many tools as we can. And so the transition area program is great. The idea of it is great. The details are pretty terrible. it's not going to produce much unless we open up single family areas and make the standards feasible and get enough geography to actually be able to build this housing. Next slide. Yeah, so I was talking about this. You know, this is very frustrating. I mean, we built this huge coalition. We've had good conversations with city planning, but thus far they've been listening to the NIMBYs mostly. And this second version of the ordinance is less equitable and less productive. So that's really frustrating. Next slide. And then finally, we want to ask city planning to not destroy the TOC program. Right now, the experts are telling us, the land use experts are telling us that this version of TOC in the ordinance is worse than what exists now because it just doesn't pencil out. Because there's not enough incentives, because there are higher inclusionary zoning standards than there were before. So this is, we love TOC. We love getting more density and being able to produce some deed restricted housing as well. It's been one of the biggest producers of affordable housing in our city. But we got to get the details right or we're going to get nothing. We've seen this over and over and over again with incentive programs. You have to get the details right. And in the last couple months, city planning has been listening to all sorts of folks with all sorts of silly concerns that this is going to be too big in my community or that to this in my community. And they have responded in a way that could kill this program. So those are the major talking points. Next slide, please. Yeah, so I telegraphed this at the beginning of our conversation. There will be an informational part of the program starting at 5 p.m. and then the meet starts at 6:30. That's the public hearing where they will take public comment virtually. So this is virtual. If you're experienced at this, you don't have to come at 5. You come at, come later. You might want to come a little bit before 6:30 so you can get on the list on the queue for public comment. But yeah, we really need your voices. And so let's stop sharing and we'll go to questions.
Any
Margaret.
questions? Great, Margaret, take it away.
Okay. Actually, one, could you say a little bit about how this process interacts with the community plan update process? Because I can see a lot of places where the provisions in CHIP really collide with what's getting built into the plans on the west side. So that one. And second, there seems to be increasing momentum to also pull back on areas that have, particularly areas that have a lot of duplexes and smaller units that are older in order to preserve our rent stabilized housing stock. And, this notion of we can't replace the only affordable housing that we have. And if you could just comment on those two dimensions, that would be helpful for me.
Sure. So the first one was the relationship between the community plans and the CHIP. So that's a great question. So the community plan process, for those of you who are not familiar with it, we have like 35 community plans throughout the city of LA. And these are the plans that kind of update the zoning for each of those areas, the base zoning. The problem is the community plan process is really broken. Some plans are 20, 25 years old. They take an extraordinary amount of time to complete the planning process, like 6 to 8 years. and they tend to get watered down tremendously over time, and are, kind of impacted by very parochial politics. So it's a very fraught process that has not gotten us good results. I think that this is why the well-meaning, smart folks at city planning, and we do have a good city planning department, built the chip, because they knew that the community plans are not going to deliver the housing that we are obligated to deliver via state law. So there are a couple community plans that the city is hoping will contribute to the rezoning program, particularly downtown LA, a DTLA 40, and the Hollywood Community Plan. Those have been more or less signed off by city council, but they still have process left in them. And it's unclear whether they actually will be signed, sealed, and delivered before the February deadline. But maybe they will be, and maybe the city will be able to count those numbers towards the RHNA. Other plans are much not far enough to along to be able to contribute to the rezoning program, like the West Side Community Plans. I think Margaret is right in identifying, the overlap of these plans as something that people are trying to wrap their heads around. I happen to be have a lobbying call today with a staff member from Council District 11, Tracy Parks District. And he mentioned this, that they are concerned about, how these plans would overlay, and would they get, I think the concern is that they're going to get things that are too big, and too disruptive of communities. I'm not sure we would see that as a bad thing, but some of the polls do see it that way. So in an ideal world, I would like to see base rezoning. We're not in that ideal world. The city is not going to base rezone to meet its RHNA obligation, or at least that's not going to be the main tool. And so I think our job as YIMBYs is just to push for as great incentives as possible, and to push for as much upzoning of low density parcels with lower displacement risk as possible, so that we can further housing production and equity. But I understand your thoughts, Margaret. I think it is confusing for people. Like, what is this going to mean for my community? There's these two things going on at the same time. It's not really a great way to run a city. It's not really a great way to instill confidence in community members who would like to have a say and understand how these things will interact with each other. And I think that's not totally clear, right? Because we don't know what the final rules for either of those processes will be. I hope that's helpful, Margaret. Shall we go to Andrew?
Yeah, sure. Hi, Scott. I guess my question, and it has no basis on my opinion on any of this, but for single family zoning, are we saying just any R1 zoning it should apply, or is there just more to it than that? Like maybe single family zonings in these certain areas, or is it just across the board single family zoning?
Right. So what we are saying is that single family zones should be eligible for the existing incentive programs, right? So we're not saying that, we are saying that the transition area program should have a wider geography, but we're not really saying we should be building a lot like upzoning Bel Air or West Hills or something like that. Really, the heart of our advocacy is we should be building single family areas that are near opportunity corridors and near transit corridors should be on the table. Secondarily, the AHIP, the Affordable Housing Incentive Program, has a much wider geography. So we'd be delighted for a single family neighborhood zones to be eligible for that program as well. But I think the heart of our advocacy is around transit corridors and high opportunity areas. And frankly, I think the political sweet spot that we're drifting towards is high opportunity areas, because we are going to need folks that represent more marginalized communities to say, we are sick and tired of shouldering all of the burden for housing. You got to do your part too. That is going to be a steep climb to get to that 8 votes, but that is the only path forward. So we haven't said that we don't support it in TOC. That's not a high opportunity, but we are saying in our most recent letter that we have a particular interest in in upzoning in highest opportunity TCAC areas because of the affirmatively furthering fair housing implications.
Thank you, Scott. Let's go to Charles.
Charles Johnson
Yeah,
from the
Charles, can you hear us? Looks like you're muted. Let's go to Misha, and then maybe we'll come back to Charles later.
Great, thank you, Scott. I learned a lot, and I was wondering if there's any way to get a copy of these slides.
Oh, sure. I think Jake can send it out to the RSVP list for this Zoom, right, Jake?
I think I can. I'll certainly send it out to you, Misha. And if anyone wants a copy of the slide deck, feel free to drop your email in the chat, just in case we're not able to access those.
And also, just a reminder, Misha, if you RSVP, we'll also have we'll send you a calendar item, and the calendar item will have a link to talking points and some resources there as well.
Perfect, thank you. And I did have a question about talking point number 2 about missing middle housing.
Yeah.
Is there a specific ask here? Are we asking for something, mentioning a specific obstacle, or how do we want them to expand opportunity?
Yeah. So what we have asked in our coalition letter is to expand the radius to at least 1/4 of a mile from the opportunity corridors. And then we have also said they created like 3 tiers. It's like so much of this stuff is just needlessly overcomplicated. So they created like 3 tiers, each of which has, within 250 feet of the opportunity corridor, you can have the most number of units, and then a little bit less, between 250 and 500. So it's so complicated and unnecessary, because it's going to reduce the capacity to build housing over 250 feet. So what we've said is just make it 1. Just get rid of the tiers, use the most generous standards, and push it out to at least 1/4 of a mile.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Great questions. Charles Johnson, SGV, are you there? Can you hear us? Can you are you able to come off mute? Okay, we'll go to Tracy. Back to Tracy.
Thanks a lot for this, Scott. It's really great. I have a question. Would it be advantageous for us to cite data from areas in San Diego that have been successful in upzoning in single family? Denver? I mean, is it worth looking at some other examples?
Yeah, I do think that that's a useful talking point. I mean, there's a bunch of places that have done this, right? So we have Minneapolis going to 3-plex zoning. We have the state of Oregon and its major urban areas going to 4, I believe. So A number of places have kind of like raised the floor. And what we see is not Armageddon. I think it's good to remind folks that nobody is saying we're going to take your house away and build a skyscraper. Like, it's going to be the choice of those homeowners, right? And some will want to stay in the home that they've lived in for decades, and some will say, oh, I was thinking of moving closer to my kids in Texas. This is a great opportunity. So it's going to be much more incremental than people might imagine. And nobody's saying what you have to do with your personal property. We're just saying you don't necessarily have control over what everyone else in your neighborhood does with their personal property. So I do think overall that is a useful talking point.
Great.
Awesome. Xavier, what's happening?
Hey, what's going on, everybody? I missed out on probably 80% of the presentation because my internet connection was very spotty. But
Yeah.
Scott, I wanted to ask you, what is the political calculus with persuading the planning commission, and I would guess eventually the city council, on basically leaning and voting towards the abundant housing agenda here? Because I know that HOAs in the city and different homeowners groups have, it seems like they've mobilized against what we proposed here. So just wondering, what's the temperature in City Hall on all this?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I'm actually been pleasantly surprised. We've been talking to a lot of council offices. I've been spending a lot of time talking to council staff. We've talked to most offices at this point. And I've actually been pleasantly surprised by how much interest there is in this idea. We've got good reception from council districts 4, 14, 10, 8, and respectful conversations with other council districts. I'm not going to say it's going to be an easy path, Xavier. As you sort of alluded to, like, single family zoning is a third rail of Los Angeles and California politics. But I think those attitudes are shifting. And I think people are sick and tired of some council districts pulling their weight and others not. So I can't predict the future. I don't know whether we will win this battle. I think if we get to some kind of compromise that puts some single family zoned areas on the table for the incentive programs, that will be a very big win for our movement. And also the coalition building that we are doing, making sure that many more organizations and their representatives and their members are vocal about this issue, also will be very beneficial for our movement, whether we win this particular skirmish or not. But I am fairly optimistic that we will get something. In fact, we met with some city planning staff recently, and they said they are considering doing something on single family zoning in version 3 of the ordinance that they will be working on post Thursday and before the city planning commission. Whether that materializes or not, we will see. But we are definitely being heard, and that is a very good thing. I will say that there are good things in this ordinance outside of single family zoning, like the increase in by right processes. And so, we're also to some extent playing kind of, an Overton window game, right? Like the city council, city planning, like, they will want to give something to the pro housing commission, to the pro housing community. So the more we push, the better result we're going to get, even if we don't win this particular battle.
Megan has a question in the chat. Do we know when it's going for a vote?
Yeah, yes. So I don't think it's been officially announced yet, but we have heard that it will come to City Planning Commission on September 6th, or somewhere around then. So we have this staff level meeting on Thursday, and then City Planning will be working on the third version, which they will bring to City Planning Commission late September. And then it will be on a fairly accelerated timeline, because they need to deliver this to the state by February, and everything needs to be, all wrapped up. So this is going to be happening this fall, unless they really screw the pooch. But I think it will probably be pretty much done by the end of the year. So it's go time, And I will say that a lot of things will get cooked, before it even hits City Planning Commission. So it's important that our voices be heard now. Thursday is so important because, City Planning Commission only has so much time on their hands. They're hearing all sorts of things. They're volunteers. Some might be activists and want to suggest this or that of a change, but the ability to change things for the better will narrow and narrow over time.
And then I think I heard Charles, but one follow-up question from Megan. How long will it be in effect? It's an ordinance, right? So it would be in perpetuity, be on the books unless there were modifications or...
That is a good question. I believe it actually, I think that's unclear. I read another coalition letter that shared some of our concerns recently that seemed to suggest that it would sunset as new community plans are adopted and stuff like that. And they're pushing back against that. So I don't think we know the answer to that question yet, but it's a really good one.
That is crazy.
At the very least, it will be in play. It will be in play during this RENA cycle. And with the speed at which community plans get updated, which is very, very slow, it will be important for quite a while.
Fascinating. Yeah, lots of great questions. Charles, are you there? I thought I heard Charles a second ago, 2 minutes ago.
I think he's putting his question in the chat.
Oh, awesome. Okay, cool. Question was just answered. Yeah, great questions all around. Any other? So we wanted to keep it to about an hour. We're right about there. Any other burning questions folks want to ask Scott, or ideas you want to bat around? Maybe time for one more. Unless you want to get out 2 minutes early, and that's good too. Cool.
Well, it's so awesome to see some new names and faces, and thank you for your engagement. Thursday is going to be a lot of fun. I think we're going to get like a lot of people out and really dominate this hearing, but it depends on you guys, and that won't be the last thing. So keep engaged. We do happy hours, we do education events, lots of ways to interact with Abundant Housing LA. Looking forward to seeing you all soon. Thanks so much for your time tonight.
Thank you so much, Scott. Thanks, everyone. So yeah, we'll be following up via email. And I dropped some resources in the chat too. Thank you. Have a great night.
Bye, guys.
How's it going? Is it Guy or never mind. How are you staying on?
I lost him.
Yeah. He was one of the first people on. I felt bad for not saying hi, but yeah. Cool. Awesome. Well, I'll see you on Saturday.
That's right. All right.
Yeah.
See you, Jake.
Thanks, Andrew. Great question.